When you hear the word voodoo, maybe your first thought is zombie.
Few would know what a powerful hold voodoo has on the 4 million people of Haiti.
Or maybe it's Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, my voodoo doll of Mom. Ow! What the?
But those of us who love retro hardware can't help but think of 3D effects when we hear that word. And Wall of Voodoo.
Eating barbecued
Iguana. But today's video is about rescuing this dead Voodoo 2 card. It lay in its cardboard coffin for way too long. It's time to re-examine this. Why are those 2 Gendeck chips sitting there? Well, we'll get to that. The big question is why? Why do I even have this card? I didn't own any Voodoo cards back in the 90s. I don't have fond memories of them, and I couldn't afford them back then anyway. Well, there's one reason for that. It's this guy. LGR. He's like the gateway drug to retro hardware obsession. I found him years ago when I was searching for the Sound Blaster Pro. I became an instant fan, and eventually you find his very compelling videos about 3D effects. And that made me think, what have I been missing out on? Why do LGR and all these people love these things so much? I gotta find out for myself. And then I found a Voodoo 2 on eBay. It looked good. It was listed as full working order. It was over $200 for me, but that's the price back in June of 2021 that they were going for. Have you seen what people are asking on eBay now? When I paid the 2 bills for this thing, I thought, well, at least I'll be able to get my money back if I sell it. But it's going for 2 or 3 times the price now. And we all know if you wait too long, it'll be gone. So I hit the buy button. I impatiently waited for a little over a week, and my card all the way from England arrived in this brown paper envelope. There wasn't any bubble wrap, there wasn't anything around the card, it was just in this envelope. Something wasn't right with this. Immediately, I plugged it into my Pentium 133. I get these blue and black bars. I tried it in my Pentium 3. Same thing. I even tried it in a 486. Blue and black bars. I went back to eBay. I told the seller how the card had arrived and the fact that it wasn't working, and he immediately refunded my money. And what's more, he said, keep the card. But it was kind of a bummer because I really wanted to try the card. So I started searching for Voodoo 2 faults, blue and black bars. The card was detected properly. It would play the 2D video through it. But as soon as it got to the 3D effects, that's when it would fail. I found some Voodoo 2 troubleshooting information on this website. So it's not exactly what I was experiencing, but it was the closest I could find, and the suggestion was replace the Gendeck chip. So I assumed that I'd never find that chip, and it would be too expensive, but much to my surprise, I found 2 for $3.74. And that's when I bought the hot air rework station for cheap, did my very first chip removal with hot air, put it back in the Pentium 3, but no change. Exact same results. So the Voodoo card lay dormant in its cardboard grave, bereft of any hope. Until the one day I was watching this vswitchzero video. He lives in my neck of the woods, and he's done really amazing things on this channel. 2 years ago, he had a video called Troubleshooting and Repairing a 3D Effects Voodoo 2, where he did exactly that and was using Mojo, the debugging tool, and explained where you could get it. I thanked him, and I had full intentions on using the Mojo tool. But I got distracted with all those board repairs, and I never got around to it. 1 year later, he has another fantastic video about relentlessly trying to fix this Voodoo 2, and that inspires me to have another look at mine. I put the card under the magnifying lens, not the microscope, and I discovered there's 2 missing caps. And then another year goes by, which takes us to 1 week ago when I finally used the microscope. But before we get into that, let's first look at the way the card works right now. This is going into the Asus VX97 that's got an MMX 233 chip. Put the card in, put the pass-through cable on, and try Mojo. And when I look at it, I see nothing that's telling me that there's a problem. I then install the Blackmagic driver, that's the stock driver, and I try Formula 1 again. And this is what happens. The exact same blue and black bars that I got 3 years ago. And I've tried everything, all the drivers, nothing made a difference. I'm hoping I can fix this problem. So back under the microscope. These are the two spots I found a year ago. That's C551 at the top and C545 right underneath it. But this time I was much more thorough and I used the microscope and I was able to find a third issue. R563 looks like it was nearly snapped off as well. Back under the microscope, that's what it looks like. That's a sizable chip that's taken out of it, so let's pull it off and see if it measures correctly. Kind of expecting it to snap in half, but amazingly it doesn't. And off screen, it's measuring several megaohms, so that part is getting replaced. I looked high and low for a component list for the STB cards, and I could find nothing. If you know if there is one out there, please let me know, because I'd still love to know what the rest of these components are. The other way I could figure this out is if I had a duplicate of the existing card. If I could just find one more. And that's exactly what I did. And then I thought, what about SLI? But we'll return to that. Let's get back to card number 2. On that card are all the parts I need. And the only problem for me is determining the voltage rating for these capacitors. But regardless, I removed C551 and C545. With my multimeter, I determined that the capacitance for C551 was 270 roughly nanofarad. And off camera, it was 100 nanofarad for the C545. The missing resistor was a 22 ohm resistor. So I began pilfering every last little tiny capacitor I could find on all of my scrap spare boards. And to put this into perspective, those are 0603 capacitors. They are impossibly small things to work with. Just trying to measure the capacitance on these things is hard enough. After an hour or more of removing these tiny capacitors, I finally found 100 nanofarad, but I never did find a 270. So I had to combine two to make 270. And that settles down to 274. I've sorted out the components, but there's one last thing, and it's extremely important. 3.5 years ago, I hadn't started using my microscope to examine electronic stuff. So I was just examining it with my magnifying lens with the light. But what I learned from the PC chips board and the unit chip board is the microscope reveals secrets that are so easy to overlook. Right here on the east side of the FBI chip, for 3.5 years, these legs have been sitting there waiting for me to finally test them. Test them properly, that is, because I'd convinced myself there was nothing wrong with the legs on any of these chips. First two are just fine. The third one, oh, look at that. Look what we have there. That fourth leg is doing the FBI shuffle. Even on the next chip, same thing. All the legs were fine. It was just those two. Put the capacitors in. That's the C551. C545 goes in. And this was the first time I've ever attempted to solder in these 0603 parts. And let me tell you, bits und bolts makes this look easy. And if you think it is, get your head out of the glue bag. This takes experience, it takes finesse, and it takes patience. This is the last of the components, R563. In it goes. Clean it up. It's time to look at those legs. Yeah, I am kicking myself, pun intended, because as soon as I put this under the microscope, it was so painfully obvious that all of my wrong assumptions made me jump to conclusions. And I know now that the FBI chip in particular makes a lot of heat. And that heat transfers into the metal and causes expansion and contraction and left me with a pair of... Yes, they did fool me. And shame on me. But this kind of an oversight's not getting past me anymore. Knock on wood. Well, that's it. It's time to test this thing. I stuff it back into the Pentium, fire it up, and after more than 3 years of procrastination and failed attempts, it finally works. Was it the legs? Was it that resistor? Doubt it was the capacitors. I don't know. All I know is that it works now. I couldn't seem to get 3D Mark to work with DirectX 6.1. I had to install DirectX 7 in this thing. So the score is a little disappointing, but I found someone else's video and yeah, they got about the same as I did. But what I really wanted to see was that, the 30 frames per second up at the top of the screen. About a year before I bought the Voodoo card, I had a little free time, so I got all the way through Tomb Raider 1 on a Pentium 3 with software rendering. You know, it does the job, but kind of disappointing. What do you think? Do you think it's better with 3D effects? Am I completely missing out on the whole point of this? And I was just so happy to get this thing working, I almost walked right into an arrow. So if you use the newer drivers, you get to see that, and I quite frankly never tire of that. When I got the second card after this one being such a failure, it was quite an exhilarating moment to finally see that thing flash. Pod is working just as expected, the textures are all correct, and there's no glitching going on. It's smooth, silky smooth. Even with that terrible glare on my screen, that still looks awesome. So, of course, we gotta try Need for Speed. This is another thing that I completely missed out on back in the late 90s. Once we get to the starting line, you can really see the rain coming down, and that tells you this is 3D effects. And after you experience Need for Speed 2 with one Voodoo 2 card, it just begs you to try it with 2. So it looks as if this is working 100%. I would like to see what it's like in a Pentium 3 though. Let's try that. And, you know, it finally occurred to me that these are 90 megahertz chips. And we'll come back to that. Right out of the gate, it starts at 38 and then proceeds down the road. I'm advancing everything here because we've all seen this before. 3,459. That's quite an increase. The second card I got has 100 megahertz chips. And I can't explain this, but the score is a little bit lower. I don't want to overheat these cards. I have no intention on overclocking them. I'm just happy that I was able to fix the first card so that I could put that in that MMX 233 Pentium. And while we're here, let's have a look at SLI. Now, I did hear about this in the late 90s. I didn't realize it was a 3D effects thing. And to me, putting extra cards in the computer seemed like you're inviting disaster. And I was playing adventure games on a 386 at that point. All right, with the SLI set up, let's see what this does. Back in 99, a Pentium 3 with an SLI 3D effects setup would have been a dream come true. That thing hit 73 when it first got out of the gate. I'm speeding this part up by 5 times just so we can get to the 3D Mark score. Look at the difference that made. 5,861. And that's over 2,300 faster than the previous fastest score. Well, I don't want any more. I've got enough as it is. I'm happy that I have the 3 that I do, and especially now, 3 fully working cards. Ironically, it kind of worked out better that the card didn't work to begin with, because clearly I got one for free, and I got to fix the thing. I got to figure out what was wrong with it.
But wait! There's more!
Back in Series 1, I opened up machine number 9, and to my incredible surprise, I found... Spin it around.
Oh my god!
Just look at it. 3D effects, ladies and gentlemen. When I turned that machine on, it said Voodoo 3 3000, and I never got around to testing the 3D effects. And this will be the computer where it lives, if it works. This is an Asus P3B-F. Let's have a look at that card. Yeah, it looked just as beautiful as that the day I pulled it out of that machine. So shiny. That's an AW64 underneath. The moment of truth. Does this card work? Pushing the button. We've seen this much so far back in Series 1. And when I got to Windows 98 on that machine, I found out that there was no 3D effects driver loaded, there weren't any games, there was no way I could test it at that moment. I put it in a box, and there it sat for all that time, untested until today. And this is the only time I'm glad to see it rain. Look at that. Just like the Voodoo 2, this one is performing 100%. Sometimes it's nice just to take a little break and have a little look at the scenery. Beautiful. Well, it's really no surprise that this card did work because just about everything else I got from that lot was fully functional and well enjoyed. I really can't get over how shiny this thing is. It looks like it sat in a time capsule for all those years. But the reality is when I found it, it was living in a garage, and maybe it was in a basement before that. You know, like a lot of all this retro hardware. It sort of moves around from place to place. But it's found a safe home in my Pentium 3. Yeah, I made a list of all the loose ends that I have yet to get to. I get to take off number 5, the Voodoo 3 test. Back in the third part of the PC Chips video, I tested that video card. In my XT IDE video, I finally outsmarted that Fortiva 5000. I've gotten some incredibly helpful comments from people. I try to reply to everyone, and I'm so thankful that there's other people that find this stuff as awesome as I do. I've got a whole lot of loose ends to tie up. You know, I might be fooling myself, but, you know, maybe I'm getting a little bit better at this. Maybe I've learned a few things over the last few years. Well, I got a bunch of stuff to get to, and I had to get some parts to do it. What do I have planned?
Boy, do I ever have a great idea for my next project. What I'm gonna do is... Well, we'd better stop listening right there. And you know why? Of course you do. It's because that's another story.